Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gouveia. I am a criminal defense attorney at the R&R Law Group located in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. And today, my friends, we're talking about trial day 2. Kari Lake is in the house. We've got a lot of witnesses to get to. It was a long day today. You can see all of these witnesses here on the right. We're going to zoom in and go through them one at a time. But to start off the program, we're going to remind ourselves about the 2 counts, both items that Kari Lake needs to prove. We'll refresh our recollection. Of course, we all know who Richard Baris is. He's over at peoples_pundit on Twitter, and he's a great follow, a very sharp fella. And he was there testifying. We've got 2 clips from him, one of him explaining the exit poll and the modeling that he was doing in order to reach his conclusions. And then, of course, we'll see what his final conclusion is. Then we're going to turn over to the defense. This is the government. We've been calling them the government because they're sort of the government. And they're like, we did a great job. We're the government. And their first witness was this fella, Dr. Kenneth Mayer. He's somebody who is very familiar with elections. He went to Yale or something, and so he's very smart. And he came in and he told us all about his opinions, and in particular that there's no data, he says, to support any of Kari Lake's claims. He said that if you did a deep analysis on the numbers, only a couple hundred people may have been upset about this. Everything else was basically perfect. He's also going to tell us tabulator errors are common, the old printer problems that we ran into. And then lastly, we'll have to listen to him tell us that voters were not actually disenfranchised, right? Part of what Kari Lake needs to prove is that there was some sort of outcome differential that would have occurred if we can prove the cause. All right, that's the government's witness. Then we're going to turn over to the co-directors of elections. And for those of you office fans out there, you know that sometimes things can go a little bit, awry when you have co-managers. Co-directors is what we've got in Arizona. Reynaldo Venezuela is in the house, along with Scott Jarrett. Both of these gentlemen testified today on behalf of the government. They both are co-directors of elections. And we know, how well that goes when Jim and Steve, get into problems over there. He tells us about the chain of custody, the courier who picks up the ballots and they, transfer them back and forth. Runbeck is also brought into this conversation. They ask him particularly about that because remember, that's one of the complaint allegations that Kari Lake is making is that individuals were inserting their family ballots right into the old courier bins. And then lastly, we get a little bit of cross-examination from the defense, which, is a little bit lacking. So we'll go through that. Then we'll refresh with this fella, Scott Jarrett. We talked about him yesterday. The Kari Lake team actually called him, asked him a couple questions. You could tell he was a very adversarial witness for the Kari Lake plaintiff team. But then the defense also called him, and they went hard with him. And you can see we've got a ton of clips from him. A little bit shorter, but I sort of wanted to tease out a lot because he's the guy who actually runs the elections, right? He's the election day. We heard from Stephen Richer, the Maricopa County recorder, but this guy's a little bit more plugged in. He runs the teams. He's actually, doing the meetings and so on. So he tells us about some of the printer issues, some intentional misconduct. He says, no, never saw anything like that. No, it's perfect. Everything's great. He talks about the estimates that were provided, and there was sort of a big gap in the estimates. People are asking themselves, where did all those ballots go? This is weird. So he gets into that. There's a little bit of cross-examination where he sort of acknowledges that they knew all about that 19-incher problem that we talked about yesterday. Remember, the 19-inchers were being printed on the 20-inchers, and you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to keep the 19-inchers with the 19-inchers, keep the 20-inchers with the 20-inchers, and, if you mix the streams, things become problematic. So the defense asked him a bunch about this. When did you learn about it? Where did the settings come from? Where did the change occur? And he says, well, we're still analyzing a lot of it. So we'll check in on that. We had another election expert. This guy's name was Ryan Macias. They brought him out to just talk about some alternative theories about printer problems and about ballots being counted regardless. So in other words, harmless error. All of these problems may have happened, but it was all harmless because the ballots were counted anyways, just manually. And then we'll get to closing arguments. We saw several different closing arguments occur. We're going to listen to 2 of them, one from Kari Lake and one from Katie Hobbs. all in the closing arguments. The judge is taking the matter under advisement. And when that opinion drops, which will probably be Friday at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, we'll, of course, cover that. But as you can see, my friends, boy, we have a lot to get to. A lot of witnesses, a lot of meat and potatoes to dive into. And if you want to be a part of the show, the best place to do that is going over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com. You can actually watch the live stream over there. We're streaming right now. And it's free. If you want to chat, you got to sign up and pay and all that stuff. But it's free. You can come hang out. We'll do an after party after the show. We do morning streams. We had a member morning stream where we talked a little bit about the day's headlines. Come and join us. Amazing community. Uncle Shane, Facts Matter, John McGarvey, Suzanne is over there, Dana36G, C. Reed, JC the Music Man, Paul Me No, and many others. It's an amazing community. Come check it out. All right. And so without any further ado, let's get right into it. Kari Lake Trial, Day 2. As usual, we want to get our bearings straight before we dive into the evidence and hear from the witnesses. Big question that we have is, what does Kari Lake have to prove? What are the elements? What are the check boxes that she needs to hit? And as we'll see in closing arguments, the defense, Katie Hobbs' defense lawyers, she literally read from this document. Okay, she came back and she said, Judge, you gave us a roadmap, and literally read this back to the judge in closing arguments because the judge set this out. He basically said, look, Kari, if you want to win, you got to hit all of these different elements. And so a quick reminder, there are 3 of them: a malfeasant person, an identified individual, somebody who is covered, a printer malfunction that was caused by that individual that resulted in identifiable lost votes, and number 3, that those votes in aggregate would have been enough to swing the outcome of the election. So she's got to prove all those things. In count 4, this is the chain of custody stuff. Very similar arguments being made that there was a problem with the ballots being transferred such that somebody interfered with the chain of custody in a way that altered the outcome of the election. Similarly, they're pointing to misconduct in the form of missing forms, which is the second evidentiary item that the Kari Lake team is trying to prove. And similarly, we also have the ability of the insertion of the ballots, right? They were saying that the Runbeck employees were taking grandma's ballot and just shoving it in the bins. So they're going to be trying to prove both of those things, and the government's going to be trying to disprove both of those things. So now that we've got that under our belt, let's finish up. Kari Lake is still presenting her case. Her team calls Mr. Richard Baris, and of course he's over on Twitter at People's Pundit, and I believe he's on YouTube. He's all over the place. And so whatever it is you're doing, open up a new tab and go follow Mr. Richard Baris because he's doing great work out there and he is an excellent witness. Let's hear from him. He's an expert pollster, does all sorts of modeling, exit polls, data super whiz, and he gets to explain exactly how this all works. He's called by the Kari Lake plaintiffs, and here is Mr. Baris.
And what was your conclusion as to the number of likely voters that were suppressed from turnout as a result of the chaos on Election Day?
Well, like anything else, I try to set a range because we have sampling errors and we have variances. So I have to feel, comfortable with the estimates that we're looking at. And I put a couple of things into this. First, I'm looking to see whether or not there's still a substantial amount of voters out there that historically we could support with historical data that they could have turned out. Meaning, would this be out of the range of normal if we were missing such a large chunk of voters, or can we look at the numbers and have expected it? The bottom line here is that those who said they would cast their vote by mail or drop their ballot off by mail completed their questionnaire at a 93% rate. There are always going to be people who tell you that they're going to participate in your poll, but then don't, especially in exit polls. The rate for election day voters was only 72%. So that I can tell you that has never happened to me before, ever.
And why is that significant?
It's significant because, looking at, we can go through it a lot more in depth, but looking at all the totality of it, there's no explanation for why these voters simply did not come back. They didn't cast their ballot. There's always going to be a difference, but the difference here is almost 20 points. It's roughly 20 percentage points. It's a significant finding, and I can only Like, in my professional opinion, I've done many of these exit polls. These people didn't complete this questionnaire because they didn't vote. They didn't get to vote. And I don't know why anybody would agree to participate in an exit poll and then not, show up in such large, why would they not vote and then complete the interview? This just doesn't happen.
What was the range of voters lost on election day?
So if we look at that 20%,
this is important testimony because we're trying to close that gap, right? It's got to change the course of the election. It's got to change the outcome. And they're trying to quantify this number using data, and this guy's got a lot of it.
Admittedly very large. Could we have expected the election day electorate itself, roughly 250,000 election day voters, could we have expected that to expand by another 20%? That's a lot, but there are means. Could we expected it to expand by 10%? Could turnout for election day have been 10% higher, 15% higher? Look at the number of votes that would mean. 10% would be 25,000 votes. Did that fall within our modeling? Sure, it fell within the modeling of the 2020 election plan for Maricopa County. What about 15%? If turnout increased on election day by 15%, we'd be looking at almost 40,000 votes roughly. Something like that absolutely could have.
You're talking a little fast.
Yeah,
Sorry.
the court reporters.
So what was the expected range that you determined of voters who were disenfranchised as a result of the election day chaos?
Between 25,000 to 40,000. And again, there's always going to be some variance there.
Okay. And what of the 25 to 40,000, what was the net effect on Republican voters?
This is important, and you can only understand that by understanding the difference in vote preference by vote method. If you showed up on election day, you were far more likely to be a straight ticket Republican than if you cast a ballot by mail. The same is also true if you were, for instance, a Democratic voter. If you voted on election day, you were far more likely to cross over and vote for another party. And the same is true of Republicans. If they voted by mail, they were far more likely to vote, for instance, for the Democratic candidate, Katie Hobbs. So you have to understand that when you're looking at it, it's not as significant of a number for disenfranchised voters as you may think. So the election day margin for Ms. Lake was huge in the areas where we saw these depressions. And by huge, it was not uncommon for her to win 76% of the vote there. It's because she was also winning large numbers of crossover voters. So, when we're looking at who may have been disenfranchised, the mail-in vote is in. We can only be talking about election day voters at this point. So one more, well, we call them dumps, but one more batch of tabulated votes in Maricopa County really could have done it.
Right, and all of the voters on election day, not all of them, but a big portion of them, as Mr. Baris is explaining, are Republicans, right? They are the people who doubt the electoral process, the electoral vote by mail process. They want to go in, see their ballot go into the tabulator, just like I did. That's exactly what I did. I went there because I didn't trust what was going on. I wanted to see it happen, and I did watch it go in. But if I had to sit there for 2 hours or 3 hours, that is the suppression that they're trying to argue, and they're trying to quantify what that gap was. And there's a big question about this suppression because, as we're going to hear as testimony goes on, they can only measure the voters at certain junctures, right? You can measure the people who show up and check in at these tabulation centers, but what about the people who just drive by the tabulation center and see a line out the door for 2 hours? How do you measure that person and quantify whether that person would have shown up had there not been a line? And what Baris is saying is I can see that gap, right? I can see the big difference between what I'm expecting and what happened in reality. And so he's sort of filling in the gap, saying it has to be the suppression because there's no other way to identify this big depression, right? If you're looking at like a chart, you'd see this sort of depression that happens. He's talking about that gap.
Well, what do you recall the range that you concluded in your report as to the number of Republican voters that were suppressed from coming out on election day as a result of the chaos?
Well, Again, I really want to caution anybody for thinking about this just as Republicans, because the vote share is so large, where the Republicans were absolutely disproportionately impacted by this. And we're talking
Election
about
day.
a net advantage that absolutely puts the margin in doubt. So we're looking, if it was 25 to roughly 40,000 votes, Mr. Olson, the margin that we saw in these areas puts this election within a few votes either way. It really does.
Would it refresh your recollection if we brought your report to know the number of voters, Republican voters, that you determined were suppressed as a result of the election day?
Percentages, we could absolutely do.
No, sir. I'm asking you came up in your report with an expected range of suppressed Republican voters. Do you recall that range?
Well, the range was, yes. The range was overall votes that would have between 2,000, it would have ranged between 2,000 hold for the current leader to roughly 4,000 for Ms. Lake.
Do you recall a range of 15,000 to 29,000 in your report?
Oh, well, yes.
Objection.
That's
Objection, Your Honor. I have an objection to that question.
I understand, though, what he's saying. Sure.
Thank you.
Counsel is leading the witness in testifying.
It is leading. If you would like to have him refresh his recollection, that'd be fine with the report, but I don't want to, it's not in evidence, put it that way.
Yes, Your Honor.
The objection is for kind of feeding him the answer. Do you remember when you said it's 17,000 votes and this whole thing is rigged? Do you remember that? Right? He's like, no, hold on. Ask him a question. Don't sort of feed him the answer. So we fast forward a little bit while he gets situated. And then the camera went out. So we fast forward through that. And we're back. And now he's ready.
Question if it would refresh his recollection or not before he's allowed to refer to his report.
Sorry, Your Honor, may I clarify what I was saying? He actually testified to the numbers, so he doesn't need his recollection refreshed.
I think I'm entitled to ask.
The question, the judge says, yeah, you are.
To look at your report.
No, I think this is a matter of nomenclature. We're just talking in different terms, where you're saying Republican votes and I'm referring to it as the net change. So I'm not thinking about this as the registration of that voter. I'm thinking about how it would impact the margin of the governor's race. So the net gain for the Republican candidate, what would the net gain be, is the margin, is the number you're referring to. So yes, it would be significant enough to change the leader of the race. It would.
And you're
So there's a big gap. There's a big missing gap of votes. He's seeing that the data doesn't match the exit polls. His modeling doesn't make any sense. The only real conclusion, the only thing that one person can speculate happened was that there was suppression. And so he's trying to get him to reach that conclusion. The questioning is a little bit choppy back and forth. The judge is sort of interrupting, and they're also getting interrupted with objections. But Richard Baris then finally shares his conclusion.
First, what is your opinion with respect to the effect of the voter suppression as a result of Election Day chaos, based on your survey, exit polling, and experience, in connection with this race where the margin between the two candidates is a little over 17,000 votes?
Mr. Olson, in my professional opinion, and some of this is not opinion, we know the vote totals in these areas that we're talking about. We know what the margins were. In my opinion, in my professional opinion, this did have an impact on the outcome. It definitely impacted the outcome. The only question for me is whether it had the potential to change the result. And in my opinion, in my professional opinion, I believe it did have that. It was substantial enough to change the leaderboard. It was.
When you say change the leaderboard, do you mean that it would
That
have
Ms. Lake
changed
would be
the
ahead
outcome?
right now. Ms. Lake would be ahead. Yes.
All right, so
Another rule.
sort of talking.
One person talks at a time because she can only take down one person.
They need headphones so they can hear each other.
I cut into your answer and broke my own rule.
Fast forward, fast forward.
In my professional opinion, the amount of Election Day voters that we're talking about here with the margin would have changed the outcome of the race. And the number is substantial enough to have changed who the overall winner was in this race.
Okay, boom. That's what they needed. That's that meaty statement, right? They can point to an expert and they can say, oh, look, Judge, you went back in your under advisement opinion and you said we got to check this box, we got to check this box, we got to check that box. And they're saying, boom, look what Richard Baris did. He just hit this box right here. You see it footnote or bullet point number 3. The votes would have affected the outcome of the election. Now they've got an expert, somebody highly qualified, somebody who does this professionally, day in and day out. Richard Baris, make sure you follow him at People's Pundit on Twitter and elsewhere. And that's hitting that checkbox. Now, the judge, right, is going to do a battle of the experts and weigh his testimony against some of the other expert testimonies that we're going to get to in a short minute. But it is checking the box. Kari Lake finishes up her case in chief. Her presentation is now done. We turn our attention back over to the defense. So the government starts their case. And remember, there's a bunch of different defendants, Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. We've got Katie Hobbs in her sort of personal capacity, Katie Hobbs in her professional capacity. And they've basically consolidated their defenses. They say everything was perfect, nothing to see here, starting with their expert. We just heard from another expert, Richard Baris. They start with their expert. Dr. Kenneth Mayer is now brought in. And after a big, long introduction with a whole slew of credentials, they tell us a lot more about this guy. They say that Kenneth Mayer went to Yale. He's very smart. He's sitting in front of a whole bunch of books. I mean, he's read all sorts of stuff about the presidents like Truman and Grant. And there's an A over here. And he's a very sophisticated gentleman, as you can see. And so he's going to share with us his expert opinion.
Yes.
Did you watch this testimony,
Have
sir?
you watched all of it?
Yes.
So as it relates to the question that you analyze, what is sort of your high level opinion?
My high level opinion is that all of the claims that were made in the complaint about the effects of voter wait times, the claims of disenfranchisement, claims of a disproportionate effect on Republicans and Lake voters, that they are all based on pure speculation, that there's simply no data to support any of those claims, and actually quite a bit of data that suggests that those things actually did not happen.
Okay, let's now discuss sort of the specifics of what you base your opinion on.
So I like how they actually rolled this expert out. They came with the big conclusion, the big umbrella first. They dropped that in first, and then they sort of started to piecemeal the rest of the argument one by one. And you can see we'll continue on. We've got 3 additional clips of this fella, but he starts off by telling us about the actual data, right? He says there's no data. The data that we see shows that there were actually almost no problems. And remember, we had several million people vote here in Arizona. A big portion of them came from Maricopa County. And the question is about that 17,700 votes. Can you close that gap? Kari Lake has to show that there were so many errors in some way, shape, or form. The chain of custody was problematic. The election day problems were enough to suppress enough votes to cross that gap. That the tabulator malfunctions were enough to, screw up the final tabulations themselves, not the actual suppression, right? So you got people who don't go in and vote because they've been suppressed. Then you've got the people who go in and vote, but their vote is allegedly not counted, right? So we're trying to separate it all out. Whatever it comes to, the total needs to be over that 17,700 votes. Kari Lake's team has been making a big point. They say this is a huge, pretty catastrophic problem. And we've got chain of custody issues that could invalidate an entire courier delivery. The whole delivery is bad because somebody was interfering with the insertion of the ballots. Or the tabulation problem was so big, it caused so many lines that it impacted 50%, whatever the allegation is, number of polling places, which suppressed over 17,000 people, many of whom would have been Kari Lake voters. If they had shown up to vote, it would have put them over the margin. And so we've heard all of that evidence. We spent all day yesterday talking about it. But this guy, Dr. Kenneth Mayer, he's got a whole different opinion on this. He's like, I don't even know what you guys are talking about. Haven't heard anything like that at all. Defense expert Kenneth Mayer for Katie Hobbs says Maricopa County was basically perfect. Everybody got to vote.
And did you examine reconciliation and provisional vote data in this case?
I examined the summary data reported by Maricopa County.
And what did that data show?
It showed that there were, I think the numbers are, there were 170 voter difference between the number of people who checked in and the number of people who cast a ballot. And we don't have information about why they were not, or they did not cast a ballot, either a ballot that wasn't counted or a potential walk-off. So that gives us an idea of the number of people who, for example, might have presented at the polling place and because of trouble with the ballot or trouble with the tabulator, simply left without putting their ballot into door 3.
Okay, so that is kind of what they're alleging is the suppressed vote. It's like less than 100 people, like 100 and something, whatever he said, not a lot. But the idea that, out of several million people who vote, we have all of the massive evidence of the problems by the Maricopa County's own admissions. They said, it's kind of chaotic out there, right? And we do have some problems. They acknowledged it. Really? It's only like 100 people who had a problem or who were suppressed? But remember that they're measuring from a much narrower scope. On this channel, we talk a lot about the hula hoop theory, right? What's inside the hula hoop? What's outside the hula hoop? This applies to everything, scope of evidence. It also applies to our personal lives, like things that are inside the hula hoop are my business. Things that are outside of the hula hoop are none of my business. Stay inside the hula hoop, right? Also works for law. We're trying to have arguments about the counting of the ballots. And here, he's measuring the voters and the counting of the ballots from the time that they walk into the polling place and check in. We just heard him say that. They check in, but they didn't cast a ballot. So that's only a couple hundred people. That's almost nobody. And they're going to go through this rest of this line of questioning on that conversation, measuring the people as they are coming in at points of measurement. But what we're not going to hear about is the people who never checked in. It's the people who never walked into the polling place because they were driving by, because they saw the line, because they checked the website or whatever, and they said, oh gosh, 90 minutes? No, I'm not going to go over there. That's crazy. I'll wait till later. And then they don't come back later because their kid threw up at school, right? How many of those were there? But they don't talk about that number because they don't want to measure that number because they can't measure that number and because that number would probably be very bad. So instead, they just go from the people who checked in to the people who didn't actually cast a ballot. And it's not that many people, obviously, because if you're there already, you're probably going to vote.
Either a ballot that wasn't counted or a potential walk-off. So that gives us an idea of the number of people who, for example, might have presented at the polling place and because of trouble with the ballot or trouble with the tabulator, simply left without putting their ballot into door 3. I also looked at the provisional vote data, the summary data produced by the county,
Their data,
which shows the number of provisional ballots that were cast in the county.
And a provisional ballot would be a ballot that is cast when you have a problem with your other ballot. So like, let's say you got you elected to vote by mail. The mail ballot comes to you, you misplace it, you show up to a polling place and you say, I'm supposed to vote. And they said, no, we mailed you a ballot. And you say, well, I need a new one. And they say, all right, well, we got to check some things, make sure you didn't mail the other ballot in. And so you're going to vote provisionally because we might have counted your mail-in ballot. I don't know. I'm sitting here. I'm an election day worker. So we'll give you a provisional ballot so that you can vote temporarily, right? We'll sort of hold it in escrow and then we'll check to see whether the other vote cleared or not. And then we'll count that vote. So the idea is if you have a big number of provisional votes, then you've got a big number of people who had problems on election day. Let's see what he says they got for provisionals.
And what about, did you look at any data about voters who perhaps checked in at one voting location, but then didn't ultimately vote there and voted somewhere else?
Yes. So there is a process that voters who check in at a voting center and for one reason or another have trouble turning in their ballot or there was a tabulator issue. They didn't want to use the door 3. They had the opportunity to actually check out of a vote station and go to a vote center and go to another vote center. And it would also show up that if someone checked in at a vote center and for whatever reason didn't submit a ballot that was tabulated and they actually left the vote center without checking out and went to another vote center. That's also something that will show up in the data, because then they'll be in the registration system twice, once where they checked in initially and once where they checked in a second time. And there were, and I would have to look at the county report. I think there were 84 people, 94 people who checked out and then checked back in and voted. There were another
94,
120 or so people who checked in
120
and then left without checking out and then cast a ballot at a second vote center. And I think all but 13 of those ballots, or all but 13 of those voters were able to successfully cast a ballot that was counted.
That's it? So like there were like basically zero problems at all, right? All but like 13 total votes is what they missed. They got everybody except 13 people. Wow, that's pretty incredible. Out of 2 million something? Amazing. So, all right, well, so that's their data. So obviously there's a pretty big gap there. We're having some questions about their numbers and their analysis, because we've got Mr. Baris and our expert Clay Parikh from yesterday, who told us there were all sorts of problems. And, this was a real big gap in data. But he comes out, he's like, no, it's like 13 people. I don't know what you're talking about. Our spreadsheets are perfect. We've reconciled everything. And he went to Yale, and he's sitting in front of a bunch of books. Richard Baris wasn't sitting in front of a bunch of books. He was there in a courtroom. Shout out to Richard. All right, so we've got tabulator errors are also being discussed, because this was the cause of the suppression. If you've got people standing in line, it's probably because there's a malfunction going on. The tabulators are not working. Is this a common problem? Is it normal for voters on election day to be waiting outside for 90 minutes?
In your experience with election administration and your work, are things like tabulator malfunction something that can happen in elections?
Yes, it happens. I want to make sure it is one of the most common issues that arises in the work on election day operations that I have studied.
And is it possible for issues with tabulators to occur even when election officials follow best practices?
Wait, what did that cup say? The what is that? The UW now? Okay.
Officials follow best practices.
Yes, it can happen for reasons that are not anticipatable. It can be just sort of machine breakdowns, or the sorts of things that are hard to predict.
All right, so that's University of Wisconsin. I was wondering what it was. Now let's see what I can't see what the other books are, but that is Dr. Kenneth Mayer. He's telling us tabulator errors, super common actually. It's kind of a normal thing. You kind of expect it, but don't worry about it, because nobody was disenfranchised. Everybody got their votes counted. All 13 people who had a little bit of a snafu, don't worry about it. It's all counted. Now we also have one final clip from the doctor where there's a little bit of a contradiction in here. See if you can tease it out. He's asked about disenfranchisement, and all of these big problems with the elections were occurring on election day. But were people ultimately disenfranchised, or did they get to participate in American process?
Okay, so to kind of wrap up this part of what we've been discussing, did you find any evidence that large numbers or any specific number of voters were disenfranchised because of the tabulator issues that occurred in Maricopa County?
Suppressed? Waiting in lines?
No, and I'll restate this as about what I said earlier. Not only is there no evidence that occurred, the evidence that we have and things that we can directly observe suggest conclusively that did not happen.
Okay, right, because he's only measuring from the people that checked in. People check in, he's making sure that they check out, their ballots counted, they cast a provisional, whatever. But there's a whole part of this equation that's missing. Goodness. What about the people who just didn't show up to vote? The people who drove by, the people who said, it's 90 minutes, I'll vote later, and they never went and voted. Right? What about our beloved senior citizens out there who don't want to stand in line for 90 minutes? Right? The sort of Momentum on that day was this idea that there was going to be a red wave. How many people sat back at home and said, oh, they're going to win. They're going to win. It's 90 minutes. You know, it's Kari Lake. Katie Hobbs didn't even campaign. What are you, nuts? And they didn't show up. So for him, it's very conclusive. Yeah, it would be conclusive for me too if I only looked at one half of the evidence. But there was no conversation at all about the other people who were suppressed before they could be counted. It's this invisible body of voters that's not even part of this equation. And he went to Yale. He knows better.
Okay, let's next discuss the lines at voting centers in Maricopa. What does the data show about wait times in the 2022 general election in Maricopa?
Working with the data that the county produced, it does indicate that there were long wait times, sometimes exceeding an hour and a half or 2 hours.
Wow, that probably hurt to admit.
At some vote centers.
Yeah, so, okay, so you see this in the same clip. In the same clip, within 10 seconds of each other, we're going to have to listen to this one again. He says there was nobody disenfranchised, 13 people, but there were lines that went up to 90 minutes.
Do you recall roughly how many vote centers had that sort of a wait time?
I would have to look at the report. I think it may have been 7%. So,
wow.
But I don't recall specifically sitting here.
Okay, 7% of all the vote centers. Remind me, was the margin of victory from Katie Hobbs bigger or smaller than 7% of all voting places? A lot smaller. Now, I don't know what the quantity of those votes were at those various polling places, but I'm going to guess it's more than 17,000 votes. 17% of however many is a lot. And here is how this wraps up.
Okay, can we pull?
All right, so let's listen to this one more time, okay? I want to play it through without my interruption. Listen to the contradiction within the same segment. It's 1 minute and 16 seconds. The question is, have you seen any disenfranchisement in Arizona? No, I've seen the exact opposite. Next question. What was the line situation like? Not good. 90-minute lines in 7% of locations in an election where the margin of victory was 17,000 votes out of 2-point-something million.
Okay, so to kind of wrap up this part of what we've
up.
been discussing, did you find any evidence that large numbers or any specific number of voters were disenfranchised because of the tabulator issues that occurred in Maricopa County?
No.
No, and I'll restate this as about what I said earlier. Not only is there no evidence that occurred, the evidence that we have and things that we can directly observe suggest conclusively that did not happen.
Okay, let's next discuss the lines at voting centers in Maricopa.
Next question.
What does the data show about wait times in the 2022 general election in Maricopa?
Working with the data that the county produced, it does indicate that there were long wait times, sometimes exceeding an hour and a half or 2 hours at some vote centers.
Wow, 2 hours. So it's like longer than a Disneyland
Do you recall
ride.
roughly how many vote centers had that sort of a wait time?
I would have to look at the report. I think it may have been 7%. So, but
wow.
I don't recall specifically sitting here.
Well, that's weird. So he just said that nobody was disenfranchised, but then there are remarks that there's clear evidence that people were waiting at 7% of polling places for up to 2 hours. Okay, well, I guess those people who showed up and left because they couldn't get the job done because of Maricopa County's malfeasance or negligence, I guess they don't matter in your equations. They were disenfranchised. They didn't get to vote. And you can't quantify them, but they're not being calculated in the entire equation. Why is that? Little dishonest. Now, the cross-examination, the closing arguments didn't bring up that point for some reason. It's kind of ridiculous, but whatever. They sort of, didn't even bring that up as far as I could tell in closing arguments. It was ridiculous. But they're only talking about what they can measure. They're not talking about the consequences of the entire failure, right? How many people showed up at 6 a.m.? How many construction workers? Shout out to our construction workers out there. I used to do some of that when I was building swimming pools. But it's it's an early morning job, right? Maybe you're out there running around in between job sites. You're going to swing in there between job sites. By the time you're done with the day, it's 2:00 or whatever. And you're just, you're not going to go back to the polling place. You're there in the morning to get it done. You can't do it. How many of other people are like that have early morning jobs and it's the only time to vote? They don't matter. They don't get counted because they can't measure it. All right. So we move on. Now we have another elections person from Maricopa County. We see Reynaldo, Venezuela, is in the house, and he's going to be explaining to us how this whole process works. And he's one of two co-directors of elections. You can see our co-director is another co-director with this fella, Scott Jarrett. And just like Michael and Jim in the office, these co-directors are, tag teaming up of Maricopa elections, and it ran as well as about the office did when the building was burning down in that one episode. But okay, let's listen to this guy, Reynaldo Venezuela or Valenzuela. I can't remember. I apologize if I wrote that incorrectly. He works as the co-director for Maricopa County, and he's explaining the process in Maricopa County, in particular how the ballots are maneuvered for chain of custody, which is one of the key points that Kari Lake needs to prove.
Mr. Valenzuela, you just mentioned one of the ways that voters can return early ballot packets is by delivering them to vote centers or drop boxes. How do those ballots that have been delivered to a drop box or vote center during early voting, how does the county get those back to the central count facility?
Very important, chain of custody. We follow the bouncing ball from A to B to B to C to C to D to D to E. If B is gone or C is gone, we can't trust what A started with and what E ended up with is reliable, because we have to look at what C did to say, what did you do? Did you manipulate that? Did you insert ballots in there? Did you put that blood sample in the microwave? Did you add in some drugs to there?
So we do have a courier process by which we assign two individuals of bipartisan differing parties, a Dem and a Rep is it specifically, and those individuals will
what
visit
kind of rep?
The site, whether it be a standalone Dropbox, a city clerk that is assigned to be a Dropbox only, and or an early voting in-person site, and those couriers would present themselves. They would, those bipartisan couriers, to the clerk, city town clerk, or the inspector at the polling place or vote center, and that they would begin that process of emptying that sealed blue box that is present for collection of those ballots.
All right, sealed blue boxes, not unlike DUI blood samples. They draw your blood into the vial, they seal the whole package up, put their name on it, label it, your name on it, put the number on it, and they transport it. And we look at those things and we say, did they manipulate this? Did they open this up? Did they write the same thing? They take pictures of it, and we want to see whether there was tampering with this. This guy is walking us through the process, because one of the allegations from Kari Lake's team is that there was manipulation of the chain of custody. One, there was no receipt for the transfer for these couriers. And two, that there were Runbeck employees, which was the third-party company that scans the ballots, which we learned a lot about yesterday from Miss Honey. All of that was problematic because people were inserting their dirty little grubby fingers into the ballot process. Let's listen to how he explains how this works.
Or packets.
Okay, and you said when you say emptying those boxes, that's emptying them at the site where the early voting site, or at the drop box.
That is correct. So they would they have a process by which, and I can delineate it, is as short as possible. Or
what's going on here?
Is as short as possible, or seals documenting the transfer of those into a secure cage that is sealed and brought back to our McTech facility.
And if we could bring up Exhibit 20. Anticipated my question. Is this document what you just described as the early voting transport statement?
It is.
And do these statements contain information about how many ballot packets the county received from the vote center or drop box?
It does, but it is after receipt at McTech, but it does indeed have that in the transport receipt section.
So towards.
All right, you can see some of the writing on this document. Early voting ballot transport statement. At location, election type, general election, election date, the date of the election. You see the name of the location. Were there ballots to be picked up? Yes. Actual time, looks like 11, arrival time 11:12. We see blue Dropbox seals, right? So the seal numbers are all written on there. Ballot box sealed, checked on 11/7, bunch of signatures. So the location staff member, the transport staff member, the transport staff member. And again, this is not unlike, criminal chain of custody documents that show it went from A to B to B to C to C to D. Transport receipt. This portion is to be completed by the person receiving this at the McTech facility, which is where we did our walk and talk down there around, downtown Phoenix. It says the receiving agent is named so-and-so, the ballot box is so-and-so, and the audit agent, right? All these signatures. And so they're showing you, look, we've got plenty of documents here. Kari Lake's claiming the documents don't exist. We've got receipts. He continues to walk us through.
Towards the bottom of that document.
Correct.
Where it says count of ballots in transport bin.
Correct.
At this time, Your Honor, I would move to admit Exhibit 20.
Objections, no. Admitted. All right, let's go.
So I think we've gotten to the point where early ballots come back to the central count facility at the county. Where do they go next?
So they go, this top part of the receipt, and it actually very clear is at location, is where they are basically just transferring those packets into a secure bin, sealing that, come to our McTech facility. Then we have two representatives, auditor boards, that are, again, made up of differing parties, a dem and a rep, that will take that and open that box and confirm and document on this bottom section, the transport receipt, all of the seals that were removed, that are brought back to from the original blue box, the new seals or the red box seals, and also the new seals we put on the box that we just left. It also will begin a process, because they're a smaller quantity, we do have a counting machine that we can run those packets through, and we will then process those and not shown here, but as an audit slip that we document how many of each packet we have received. There are three different types of packets: an in-person counter packet, which is a white envelope; a mail ballot, which an individual, we mailed it and they opted to deliver it, so it's a green envelope; and then we have voters that may have cast a provisional ballot. So there are three envelopes. They will take those bins, they will count those, they will document on there, count of ballots in transform bin, and they will ready them to then be commingled with several other boxes brought in and seal that for transport for an inbound scan process at Runbeck.
And just briefly, you mentioned the different.
So he's a good witness, right? He's very knowledgeable. He testifies with expertise. These are the types of witnesses that nobody likes, right? Well, the opposing side doesn't like, because he communicates clearly. He knows the process inside and out, and they're just asking him to walk through it. We have some defense expert witnesses for DUIs who are just like this. They're really good.
Colors of envelopes on this form next to the line where it says count of ballots, where it says 107G/31W. What does that mean?
That would be the 107 green affidavits, which would indicate mail ballots returned, and 31 white, which would mean in-person early voters that still, because there is no tabula there, still follow the envelope process or packet.
Okay. So you've also mentioned receiving ballots by mail. How does the county take possession of ballots that are mailed back?
So the county has, with the United States Postal Service, an arrangement that they do not deliver to us. We actually must physically be present at their main processing distribution center and have access list of individuals from our offices that would be eligible for that secure facility entry. And so we pick those up, again, with two individuals, a differing party, and they have those individuals' names on file, and they must show badges, and we collect those directly from the United States Postal Service.
And when the county employees pick up the ballots from the United States Postal Service, how are they packaged?
So like all mail that goes to that distribution, millions of pieces they go through, including mail packets, they are trayed and sleeved and caged. So when we come, There's a postal receipt that is an estimate of tray counts and totals within that tray. And so they are delivered to us at the dock.
All right, so we're going to come back on this point. He's talking about these trays, right, and these estimates, how many ballots are coming in, how many votes are coming in, because this was something that it popped up in this trial. It popped up in the news. There were estimates that, there was going to be a whole bunch more votes coming in, and there's a discrepancy in this gap. And people are saying, Kari Lake's team in particular, they're saying, well, where did all these extra votes come from that just suddenly changed the margin? It seems very convenient that they just popped up out of nowhere. And he's saying, well, when we get them from the post office, they sort of bundle them up for us. It's like if you go out of town for 2 months or you go to the post office, can you hold my mail for us? You go pick it up. They give you a whole bin of it, right? Or you go to your post office box after a long time, it's all wrapped up for you. So same thing's happening here. Post office assembles all the early votes. They put them on these trays. It gives Maricopa County the ability to make an assessment, right? So they can say, well, it looks like we've got about 35 trays over here. And so if we can do, 500 votes per tray, 35 times 500, we have this many votes that still need to be counted. And apparently there was an estimate made that wasn't such a good estimate, and that we are now identifying a big gap. There were a slew of additional ballots that were unaccounted for. And he's laying some foundation for this as we go on.
And approximately 30 trays per cage. So if we had 2 cages, we could have 60 trays with X amount of packets within them.
And what do the county employees, where do they go next with those ballots when they leave the United States Postal Service facility on 48th and Washington?
So those 2 couriers or pickup individuals will go straight to Runbeck with that particular day's mail, whether it's several trays or several cages, depending on the turnout on that given day. And we then check in and transfer that. We complete a delivery receipt with Runbeck and transfer those cages into their custody with our county protective services there on site. But they are taken to Runbeck and transfer custody with chain of custody documentation.
All right, so from the post office right to that third-party provider, right? And this is where we start to get into that little gray area, because Kari Lake is saying, well, that third-party provider wasn't following the same election manual rules. They weren't doing the appropriate things that the law says that they have to do. One of those inappropriate things was their voters, their employees were just shoving ballots, right? And, they're scanning all these new ballots that came in. They just throw in grandmas, grandpas, a couple of dead relatives, whatever, right on top of the ballot pile, and it just goes through. So he's saying that until this point, right, Maricopa County is sort of like a liaison. They don't really even, they have custody of it sort of, but just to pick it up from the post office, just to drop it off at Runbeck.
Okay, so at this point in the early ballot process, what services is Runbeck providing to the county when you drop those ballots off? Ballot packets.
So those packets themselves, they undergo what is called an inbound scan. And what that inbound scan's purpose is 3 things. Is to, 1, take an image of that packet so that we have an actual image to utilize for signature verification instead of farming those physical packets around for signature review. So image of the packet, number 1. 2, they do a count, an actual detailed count of those packets in that cage to report back. And 3, they're also identifying and validating that it is an actual packet that we created, utilizing that piece ID, that unique piece ID tied to that voter that is specific to that election and created by us and in our system for the voter.
Big spreadsheet.
Let me step back for a moment. Well, I think I needed to go one step back in the process to cover something else. Can you bring up Exhibit 82, please?
So they get this admitted eventually.
This document that's up on the screen right now.
All right, so they just literally, for the rest of his testimony, it's a lot more of the same. They are walking through the chain of custody documents, and we have another clip here where he gets asked the big question, okay? One of the things that is critical is about intentionality. It's about malfeasance. There's a part in the judge's roadmap that he articulated for us that there's a malfeasant person covered under Arizona law somewhere in the chain of custody or elsewhere. Also for chain of custody, remember the judge wanted to see evidence that there was an employee of Runbeck who added ballots of family members. You can see that right there. And so they brought this guy out. They really needed to ask him that question because they have to disprove that element, right? Kari Lake is trying to prove that. This gentleman is trying to disprove that, or the government is trying to disprove that through his testimony. Let's listen.
Has the county ever authorized Runbeck to allow its employees to deliver their own early ballot packets directly to Runbeck?
No.
No.
And are you aware of Runbeck allowing its employees to do so in the past?
No.
No. There you go. So that, for them, negates that one element, right? And she said, oh, that was easy. Okay, well, I'll just move on to the next one.
No further questions for this witness?
No further questions. I guess we're done, right? He gives that smirk there because remember, what makes this case so difficult for Kari Lake is that it's her burden to prove it. They don't have to prove anything. They don't have to investigate anything. They just say, we did our job. The presumption is propriety. Just like we demand that you have the presumption of innocence, the government in this case, the law affords them the presumption of propriety. And so this guy comes out, no, I have no evidence of any of that. Don't see anybody doing anything problematic at all. And to get a little cross-examination in here, let's pull this one up. Kari Lake's lawyers cross-examine the co-director of Maricopa elections, asking him about the process.
So, Your Honor, Mr. Valenzuela, isn't it true that no Maricopa County employees operate Runbeck equipment?
No, correct.
Okay. So isn't it true then that you farm out the counting of ballots to Runbeck on election day?
We do not.
We
do not count ballots. They count packets.
I think you just said you accept the U.S. Postal Service's weight receipt.
We don't utilize that for a final count.
You rely on Runbeck to run these through their machine and give you a count. Isn't that correct?
That is correct, of the packets.
Okay. And the county...
So he distinguished between packets and ballots, right? Ballots are the actual ballot, but the ballot goes inside the envelope, which has the affidavit and, which has the signature on the outside. That gets mailed in. And so Runbeck is assessing that, not necessarily the ballot. So they're sort of splicing words here.
Does not run or operate Runbeck?
It is a certified vendor that we contract with.
Okay. And Exhibit 80, that's just an inbound receipt of estimates, is that correct?
I'm sorry, you turn...
The inbound receipt of estimates, that's just an estimate, correct?
For the...
Exhibit 80?
For the USPS packets.
Who created Exhibit 80?
So that's the big tray, right? That's them saying, we think we have 500 trays times 200 votes equals this many estimates.
Hold on.
Judge stops them.
I think Mr. Bloom is citing the wrong exhibit number.
Oh, I'm sorry. The inbound receipt, the last one that was received. The inbound receipt.
82.
82. Thank you. Who created that document?
The format of the document?
Who made the document? Who signs the document?
Well, signs the document, it's shared between Runbeck and a county employee that concurred.
So it shows, does it not, that you are turning over ballots to Runbeck, correct?
We're turning packets over.
Packets. You have no idea exactly how many you're turning over, correct?
We have an estimate, but we rely on that count, that certified vendor to do that.
Right. Why do we use chain of custody documents that show the details of how many ballots we have?
Objection.
When you count ballots, you put them on a chain of custody form, correct?
Wait a second.
EVBTS process?
Objection.
Yeah, so this is...
Calling for speculation, lack of foundation.
Speculation?
Hold on, wait, let me rule.
Yeah,
I was going to ask a different question, Your Honor, because I'm...
Okay, withdrawn?
EVBTS documents that you testified about and we just admitted into evidence. Those contain counts, do they not?
They do.
Of the number of ballots that were brought back. Why do we do that?
The number of ballots that are delivered and the number estimated in some cases.
Why do we do that?
Why do we provide that?
Yes.
So that we have a basis to reconcile to some degree.
Okay. Isn't it so that we know exactly how many ballots were injected into the system at each point in the process?
It is not, because we don't have that at the post office level.
As you sat here, you just testified.
Hold on, wait a second. Just a second. let him finish answering. We only have one person speaking at a time, please. Okay?
Sure.
For the sake of my court reporter. Okay?
All right, so it gets a little bit off the rails there, but you can see what the point that they're trying to make is. You see that we're trying to get an idea on what the global total of the ballots are at the top of the funnel. Everything coming in, we want to see what the total number is so that we can measure it as we go down. And it's a difficult thing to measure because the U.S. Postal Service doesn't measure that, right? They're not counting how many they put into the bins. They just say, well, this is what we've got. This is everything that came in. Everything that comes through to this address is here for you. Come get it. And so they don't have a good starting point. So they're seeing that there was an estimate made, and the estimate evidently is quite off. And that's the point that Kari Lake's defense team was trying to get into. But let's go to the day of ballots, because Mr. Reynaldo Valenzuela was the co-director of elections for the early votes and many of those early ballots. But the question that many of us have had is about Election Day. And for that, we turn our attention over to Scott Jarrett, the co-director of elections, along with Mr. Valenzuela. They were in charge of all of the problems that we all suffered through and continue to suffer through as a result of these two geniuses. But they are now turning this over to Mr. Jarrett. And we've already heard from Jarrett yesterday. He was called by the Kari Lake plaintiffs team, and he testified about not knowing a whole lot about these sort of 19-inch, 20-inch ballots. It sort of was a question that caught him by surprise, what felt like to us by surprise. And then he explained it as they didn't even do any testing for it, right? He kind of just wrote that off. We played his clip yesterday. But he actually knew all about this 19-inch ballot, and we learned a lot more about that today during the cross-examination. But the government brought him out. He is a witness who's going to be testifying on their behalf, and we learn a little bit more about him. Of course, he has the co-director title, and let's listen to him explain that.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jarrett. Could you please state your name?
Yep, Robert Scott Jarrett.
And where do you currently work, Mr. Jarrett?
I work for the Maricopa County Elections Department.
What is your current position?
So I am the co-director of the Elections Department. I oversee in-person voting and
you have two directors?
Operations.
You have
How
two
long
directors?
have you held this position?
I was appointed by the Board of Supervisors in 2019.
And could you just briefly describe your job duties in that position?
Yes, so I oversee all in-person voting operations. So that includes early in-person voting that I report up to the Maricopa County Recorder for. That does include drop boxes. I also then oversee in-person voting on Election Day, as well as, so that would be all the recruiting and training of poll workers.
Okay.
Recruiting of temporary staff that work at McTech or the Maricopa County Elections and Tabulation Center. And then I would also oversee warehouse operations, then all tabulation functions, including at the central count facility as well as at the voting locations.
All right, so he's plugged in, right? This isn't a guy who can say, I didn't know anything about what was going on. I wasn't responsible for that. Stephen Richer, he's like, I'm in Panama, bro. Like, what are you even talking about? I was out way late last night. I had way too much tequila. But he's now deferring over to these people. The government calls him to testify, and he's explaining his role. He also tells us about some of the wait times and why these wait times weren't in fact that big of a problem at all. People love waiting in line to vote on Election Day. Surely that didn't suppress anybody.
Secure ballot box. Secure ballot box.
What? That's not the clip that I wanted. That was evidently a bad clip. Let me see if I can find that clip. That was a one that I uploaded that wasn't the one that I wanted. So let's see if I can grab it.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jarrett. Could you please?
This is probably the one.
So, based on the county's analysis, what were the longest wait times on Election Day?
So we had at about 16 locations wait times approaching about 2 hours, or between 90 minutes and 2 hours. And that was not for the entire day. That was intermittent. Some of those were towards the end of the day. But in every one of those instances, we had locations that were close by for a voter to be able to choose a different option to be able to drive to. In some of those cases, it was less than 1 minute wait times.
Yeah, so you could just leave. If you show up to your polling place and there's a 2-hour line, just go figure out another one. All right, it's not our problem. Get back in your car, go someplace else. And it's only just a couple minutes away. So we didn't screw anything up. You screwed up if you didn't vote by not finding a different place to vote.
And just to reiterate earlier, that's all communicated and publicly available to the public on the county's websites.
That's correct. They could sort on our website not only by entering in their address.
Yeah, just go to the website.
By wait times
Idiot
as well.
voters, Republican
and
idiots.
We had more than 85% of our voting locations on election day never had a wait time in excess of 45 minutes. And it was, I believe it was over 160 locations never had a wait time over 30 minutes.
Okay, 30 to 45 minutes.
So this
is that normal?
That
Is that normal? I voted many times before, and I never had a wait time more than 5 minutes, to be perfectly honest with you. And I would expect that to be kind of the standard around the rest of the world, or the rest of the country at least. And in Arizona this year, when I actually went downtown, it was maybe about 5 minutes. It was not long, which is how it should have been. 45 minutes, 90 minutes, 2 hours is insane. And to just say, just go on the website, figure out someplace else to go. Not ideal.
Was this part of the analysis that was provided in the report to the Attorney General that was discussed yesterday?
Yes, that's correct. So I drafted that report. It was based off of all the information that we had, the data that we had in the Maricopa County Elections Department. So every aspect of that. And with regarding to wait times, it's based off that very systematic approach of how we train voters, or how we train our poll workers to enter that data based on the number of voters in line.
So is it your belief that the information in that report was accurate and correct?
That's correct. I believe that it was accurate. And what I communicated to the Attorney General through that report
is it was all perfect. Everything I've ever touched is great. All right, so he's admitting that there were long wait times. We had another individual who said that there were also long wait times, Dr. Kenneth Mayer, but both of these people don't think it's a big deal. Now, I said before that I think that the voter suppression alone should be actionable. It's not under what this current judge is considering, right? The judge wants very specific elements proven, but the idea that you could have, right, problems in voting on election day at large swaths of the entire county, and that's not voter suppression, is kind of, laughable as far as I can tell. So he says it's not a big deal. Wait times, right, your own damn fault if you can't figure out another location to go to. And also the printer problems weren't even a big deal because all of the printer ballots were duplicated and all the votes counted regardless.
So based on the county's analysis, what were the longest wait times on election day?
So we had at about 16 locations, wait times approaching about 2 hours, or between 90 minutes and 2 hours.
2 hours?
And that was not for the entire day. That was intermittent. Some of those were towards the end of the day. But in every one of those instances, we had locations that were close by for a voter to be able to choose a different option.
2 hours is what he said, which is just nuts. And of course, that is a very, very long time. So we have another clip here about
on election day in 2022, were there issues with some of the county's ballot on demand printers?
Tabulators.
Yes, there were some issues with some of our printers.
And can you describe what those issues were?
So we are in the middle of our root cause analysis still on this, but we have
So we don't know is what he says. They're in the middle of their root cause analysis, so they have no idea what the problem was.
Issues with some of our printers.
And can you describe what those issues were?
So we are in the middle of our root cause analysis.
No idea.
On this, but we have identified a few items that contributed to the printer issues. The first was our, and what we would have our smaller printers, OT printer. And that was, it was not printing ballot timing marks on the back of the timing mark dark enough, or some of them were speckled. And that was due to what we identified was the printer settings or the heat settings on a fuser. And we needed to adjust those printer settings to all be consistent at the highest heat setting. Now, we had used these heat settings for prior elections in 2020 as well as the August 2022 primary, the exact same heat settings. We had gone through stress testing and identified that this was not an issue or was not identified through that testing. But on election day, we identified that due to the variance and the number of ballots being printed through, along with the
on election day
envelope as well as the control slip, we needed to change those heat settings to be consistent for all three types of items being printed from those printers to be at the highest heat setting or the heavy heat setting.
Yeah, thanks for that great explanation. Thanks for figuring that out for us.
Other items that we've identified, though, as far as our ballot on demand printers, we did identify 3 different locations that had a fit to paper setting that was adjusted on election day. So those were at our Journey Church in a North Glendale, Peoria area. That had about 200 or a little over 200 ballots had that setting on it.
Not enough to hit the 17,000. Just
location.
A couple hundred.
That'd be the same with our Gateway Fellowship Church, which is in a East Mesa voting location. That had about 900 ballots out of just shy of 2,000 ballots voted at that voting location. And then we had a LDS church, Lakeshore, in the heart of Tempe, that had
shout out to Tempe. We love Tempe and Julie.
1,500. So just shy of 1,300 ballots. And that was due to our temporary technicians, when they were trying to identify solutions on election day, adjusting a setting. Now, this was not direction that we provided from the Maricopa County Elections Department.
We didn't do it.
But adjusting that setting to a
we didn't do that.
paper setting.
Somebody else made that setting
change.
change.
That was one of the vote centers that was reviewed in the inspection by the plaintiffs in this trial on Monday.
So that...
Or what's that, Tuesday? I forget the day. I've been working every day through the weekend.
Right. So if I'm understanding you, on election day, when there was troubleshooting trying to identify this ballot on demand printer issue, one of the T-Techs or some of the T-Techs adjusted that setting, and that impacted some of the ballots that were cast at those 3 locations. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, it did impact ballots.
Not a 19-inch ballot, right? When that happens, it's a 20-inch ballot, a definition of a 20-inch ballot that's loaded on the laptop that is connected to the ballot on demand printer that gets printed onto then a 20-inch piece of paper, but because of the fit to paper setting, it actually shrinks the size of that ballot. And then that ballot would not be tabulated on site at the voting location, and also could not be tabulated on site at Central Count.
So if it couldn't be tabulated at the voting location and at Central Count through the regular tabulators, what happened to those ballots?
So those ballots came back to the Central Count facility, and then we had hired duplication boards, a bipartisan team, Republicans and Democrats, to duplicate that ballot. So they first affix a marrying number to that ballot. So that would then be able to identify that ballot back to then the ballot that gets duplicated on site at the elections department. So we can marry those 2 up, and all the votes get transferred to the duplicated ballot that gets counted and tabulated.
So ultimately, all of those ballots were tabulated.
That's correct.
They all counted, every single one of them. So there were no problems, right? All of the delays, all of the suppression, all of it, was sort of irrelevant. They didn't even count most of the suppression. All the ballot stuff was all duplicated. So if there were any problems, it all got counted anyways.
On election day in 2022, were there issues with some of the county's ballot on demand printers?
So I think I sort of got my clips out of order here. So let's see what this one is.
All right, one last point, Scott. I during the course of this process, we've heard discussion of the 275,000 plus estimate that was made after voting was completed on election day. Can you explain how that number, how that estimate gets made on?
Yes, this is the problem with that missing gap of ballots. Where did the estimate come from? Why does the estimate differ from the total actual number that was actually collected?
On election night.
So those were based off all those green affidavit envelopes coming back through those blue transport bins that we broke the tamper evidence seals on, and then taking those out and organizing them into those mail trays. So at that point, it's just an estimate. And so then Mr. Recorder, Richard, he made an estimate early in the day following Election Day on 11/9, the day after. We had not finished our scanning in process. That wasn't completed till much later in the evening, just shortly after 5 p.m., when we had that full accounting for all those 290,000 early ballots. So that estimate was released earlier in the day to just give an indication of there was going to be 275,000 plus early ballots that still needed to be counted.
It's just an early estimate. All of this stuff has an explanation. Everything that you might think was nefarious, no, it's just a timing thing, or it's just a policy thing, or somebody else just interpreted something, or there was a mistake, or there was some random tech who tried to do a shrink to print or a fit to print, or in any one of these things. It's all explainable. None of it's nefarious. Definitely not malfeasance, right?
Thank you, Scott. One moment.
That's all we've got from her.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor.
No additional questions on that one from Mr. Scott. So I think we had another clip or two from him.
All right. One last point, Scott. I during the course of this.
Did you know about the fit? When did you learn about this fit to print?
All right. So this is cross-examination. The big question that we've had of Mr. Jarrett is, when did we know about the difference between the 19-incher and the 20-inch ballots? Because if they're using the wrong printing settings, maybe that's what caused all of the Election Day mess. And if that is the cause of the mess, who caused the change of the printer settings?
When we started doing the audit reconciliation of those door 3 ballots, we identified some of those ballots had then a fit to paper issue.
And when was that?
I don't remember the exact dates, but a few days after Election Day.
And who told you about that?
Our ballot tabulation team and our audit review team that was then doing the inspection of the door 3 ballots.
Who? What's the name?
So,
what name?
And I believe your testimony was that you discovered this only in 3 vote center locations, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So, did you look at the other locations to see if this so-called fit to print issue arose at other locations?
No.
We looked at all the door 3 misread ballots that were in the secure door 3, and we didn't identify any of those that a fit to paper issue.
Fit to paper issue. So if evidence showed up that there was a 19-inch ballot imprinted on a 20-inch piece of paper out of the Anthem location, that's not one of the locations that you identified, is it?
I did not identify that from Anthem.
So, okay, like a good start to the cross-examination. I'd love to know if they got a particular name out of that, and I don't know if he's allowed to go into that or not. Here's the final part of the cross-exam.
When did this so-called adjustment to the printer settings happen on Election Day that gave rise to this fit to print issue?
I don't have the specific time, but it was during the course of Election Day.
So they knew on Election Day.
And was this fit to print issue, how did those settings get changed? Was it at the direction of somebody from Maricopa or just somebody on their own doing it?
It was not at the direction of anyone from Maricopa County.
Okay, well then who did it? Who made the changes?
So was the change in the settings in response to tabulator issues?
So we believe at least at one of the sites, one of the technicians was attempting to troubleshoot and then made that change.
So if other sites, if the tabulator issues arose immediately before any technician made any changes to the print settings, then your theory of a fit to print issue would not be correct. Yes?
No, I disagree.
So when would the changes to the printer settings have been made?
So the reason I know it didn't occur prior is because during our test prints, prior to Election Day, there was no identified fit to paper setting issue.
Okay, so there was the next day. So you want to dive in on that. At what locations were the different settings? What were the people who made the changes? When did they make the changes? How did they make the changes? Did they have authorization to make the changes? Did you approve the changes? What was the whole sequence there? Who's responsible for all of these changes? Because remember, my friends, we still have to find a person. We still have to go to intentionality or actual malfeasance, right? The statute doesn't really talk about intent like a criminal statute does. It talks about malfeasant person, an identifiable individual. We are so close right here. Who is responsible for all of this stuff?
And when was that?
We do that during when we're setting up each voting location. We run test prints on all of the printers.
And how would you know that it didn't arise?
It was never reported back through our chain of custody from the technicians to up to me, which they would have reported that to me.
Why do you think they would have reported it to you?
Because I meet with the team routinely and throughout the day, and I've even asked them subsequently, and they've said that they never identified it during any of the setups.
So did you have a meeting with all these technicians and ask them this question?
I had a meeting with our command center teams.
Were all the technicians asked about this fit to print issue?
No.
I don't know if all the technicians were.
Is there any documentation of any inquiry about this fit to print issue?
I don't know if there's any documentation.
So you said you performed a root cause analysis to determine how these problems arose on Election Day?
We're in the process of performing a root cause analysis.
So they don't even know what caused these issues. And the defense attorney's not getting a name out of them.
And as part of that root cause analysis, you determined that there was this fit to print issue in 3 locations, correct?
That's correct.
Is there any documentation preceding yesterday's testimony that identifies this issue?
As part of, yes, there is some documentation.
What documentation?
So some of our audit reconciliation forms that identified the 3 locations.
And what do those audit reconciliation forms show?
They show the number of check-ins from voting locations. They show the number of door 3 ballots, and then notes based off our audit reconciliation.
Okay. Does it say fit to print issue was the cause, or words to that effect on those forms?
It actually is using the term shrink to fit, not fit to
shrink to fit. Shrink to fit. And was that determined to be the cause, or is that was that an assumption as a possibility?
It was determined to be the cause for those 3 locations.
Okay. Does that cause happen on its own, or does somebody have to change a setting in order for that change to be made, right? And who made that change? Is it possible for the computer to just change a setting on its own? You tested this the day before, didn't you? Yeah. And it worked the day before, right? Yeah. And so you came back the next day and the settings were changed, right? Yeah. And was there a person there who was supposed to be responsible for this machine? Yeah. What's their name? Okay. Did you have a conversation with them? Yeah. All right. And, you get that name out, and did you determine a cause for that? And, hearsay objections, or what did he say? Hearsay objections. But you can see, right, where are we going with this? Get the name.
Ones that wouldn't be read at the voting location and then be read at central count.
And again, you did not mention this in your testimony yesterday, did you?
I did not.
No, because you're dishonest.
Did you publish anywhere that there was this shrink to fit issue after the election?
We've not.
So you didn't tell the public, hey, we've discovered. I mean, you're performing a root cause analysis and you find out that there was this shrink to fit issue that gave rise to problems in the tabulators, and you did not inform the public about this.
We're still in the process of
still investigating it, that's why. Okay. All right, so he moves on. You can see.
With respect.
Okay, he moves on, right? This is Kari Lake's lawyer. He just moves right on, and he left that line of questioning. He left that inquiry, and then tried to impeach him, essentially, right? He was diving in. Who done it? Who done it? How did it get done? Where is all of this chain? He gets really close, and then he tries to impeach him. You're a liar. You didn't talk about this yesterday, right? Without finishing that entire line of questioning. Now, to be fair, I don't know if the judge precluded him or if there's some sort of motion in limine somewhere. I didn't see it, and I don't know, there really hasn't been a lot of limitations on the line of testimony thus far in the trial, so I don't know why the judge would limit it now. The judge has allowed all sorts of other things in that he would not ordinarily allow in, like, for example, 50 pages of text messages. So this attorney could have had a lot more license and gone after him. Who did it? Who's on the team? Who reports to you? How often do you meet with them? What are their names? All right. Are they part of the root cause analysis? How many machines did they have access to? What's their day-to-day? Are they still working for you? Have they been disciplined? Have you issued any corrective actions to them? Good Lord. Gosh. That's like off the top of my head, right? And this guy just skipped right over all of it. I'm so irritated right now. All right. So this is the next witness, Ryan Macias, who is an election expert. This is another defense person who is called in for Katie Hobbs and the government. And this is an expert witness who was the subject of some controversy today. You'll notice that Ryan Macias, we have 2 short clips of him, but when he was testifying, there was a lot of hubbub about this. He looked like he was reading, right? And I agree that the analysis of Twitter and many of you on Locals and many of you on YouTube and our Rumble friends are all confirming that it also looked like he was reading, because he sort of looks down and to his right and then looks back up at the camera like he's looking at now. Whatever happened, the judge said, no, I don't think he's reading, so just allow it to go on. But it really threw off Kari Lake's team for a bit.
And assuming that some ballots were printed with a shrunken image or a 19-inch image on 20-inch ballot paper, what are possible reasons why this could occur based on your experience and expertise?
Yeah, so specifically for a 19-inch ballot image being printed on a 20-inch piece of paper, there's a few different scenarios in which that could have happened. One of which is, as I was listening to Mr. Jarrett's testimony a little while ago with the shrink to fit, this could have shrunken it down to a smaller scale. I don't know necessarily whether or not that would be down to a 19-inch scale,
but there's an explanation for it, right? It's the shrink to fit stuff. And so he came out, he got access to a bunch of their data, and he was just analyzing it and coming to their conclusions as well. But the sort of the takeaway from his testimony is that it doesn't really matter, what the problems were throughout the entire election, because he studies Maricopa County and he knows that these ballots would have been counted regardless. Here is Ryan Macias saying that any of the election errors were inconsequential. Harmless error. Didn't matter at all. Wouldn't have changed the outcome of the election because they were counted.
Familiarity with Maricopa County's processes. Are you aware of, or can you tell us what would happen to a ballot that a tabulator could not scan because of either print to fit issue or a faintly printed timing mark? What would happen to those ballots?
Yeah, so those ballots, first and foremost, would be counted. They would ultimately be counted because
that's what they wanted.
As elections are resilient, we have processes in place to be able to ensure that every voter's ballot is counted and cast as intended. And so the Elections Procedures Manual has a process that allows for a ballot that cannot be scanned, whether this because of a shrink to fit issue, a torn ballot, or another issue where a timing mark cannot be read or the scanner cannot read the ballot, to set up a ballot duplication board. The ballot duplication board would thereby mark another ballot with the voters' votes as intended, and then scan and tabulate that alternate ballot.
It does look like he's reading, doesn't it? He said he wasn't. The judge said he wasn't. And so that was the final witness presented by the Katie Hobbs defense. You see Ryan Macias, the election expert there. And so we get ourselves over to closing arguments. Of course, we've got Kari Lake and her defense who start first. The judge allows him to get started. And this is how it goes. Closing arguments in the Kari Lake case. Kari's lawyers explain to the judge, this is madness.
Mr. Olson, we'll hear from you first, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor has heard 2 days of testimony, sworn testimony. Some of it doesn't make sense. Some of it does. The law in Arizona is that an election challenger must put forward evidence sufficient to show that the outcome is wrong or at least uncertain. And that is the seminal case of Finley v. Sorensen.
The standard.
Plaintiffs have met that standard. There's just a little over 17,000 votes out of nearly 1.6 million that separate the candidates. That's less than 0.06%. The two issues that Your Honor directed plaintiff to support, that was intentional conduct,
which we started
with the
at the top of
tabulators
this
in terms
video,
of the malfunctions, the rejections that occurred on election day, and also the chain of custody issue. We've done that, Your Honor. We heard some startling testimony. I had to kind of regroup here from what my prepared closing remarks. And that startling testimony from Mr. Jarrett today, it just doesn't make sense. And I'll say why. And this is in terms of whether when we showed through the inspection of ballots, a random selection of ballots from six voting centers, not 3, 6. Mr. Parikh found evidence, ballots that had 19-inch images imprinted on them on 20-inch sized paper. He found that in all 6 vote centers that were randomly selected. Mr. Jarrett yesterday testified under oath when he was asked that could it happen or did it happen that a 19-inch image was imprinted on a 20-inch piece of paper, and he testified no. And not only that, his counsel, Mr. Liddy, went with the shrink to fit excuse, and he never said, oh yeah, that's what happened. We've known about this since shortly after the election, and we're doing a root cause analysis. None of this, it doesn't make sense. Another thing that
it doesn't make sense. Now, that was a repeated phrase throughout the rest of his closing argument, and he said that a lot. He said, it doesn't make sense, it's not right, and he sort of did a pound the table close for the rest of his closing argument. Very upset, saying, the right to vote is essential to America and all this stuff. And what I heard was more of an emotional argument rather than a more, go down the checkbox approach and check each box. He did bring up a lot of the evidence, and he, walks us through some of it, but he's very upset about, what essentially has happened here in the election. It's a very emotional type of close. And so we'll fast forward through that. We also have the Katie Hobbs defense team and her close, which was a little bit more prosecutorial. It's a little bit more direct. She actually talks about the elements of the law. Let's listen.
Just 3 days ago, Kari Lake's lawyer stood in this room and made a promise. Having filled 70 pages of a complaint with grandiose tales of electoral malfeasance, they asked the court to give them a chance to prove their case at trial. Underpinning that argument was the implied promise that they would come to court to trial with something, with anything, to justify Ms. Lake's decision to call on a court of law to give her a victory that the voters of Arizona had denied her. Kari Lake asked this court to give her the opportunity to make good on that promise, and the court did just that.
Right, and we talked about this. I've said for a while, I think this judge is allowing this trial to go forward so that the claims can be presented, because the judge doesn't want anybody to have the opportunity to say that they didn't have their day in court.
It gave her the opportunity to move beyond mere allegations and speculations and accusations and bring to light the factual bases for her claims and the actual evidence to prove them. This court not only provided a forum for her to establish her claims, but also set up a clear roadmap for how to do it in its order from earlier this week. Kari Lake and her lawyers knew what they had to do at this trial, and 3 days ago, they knew the hand that they had to play. They knew the evidence they had, and they knew the evidence they didn't. This was their big moment to show their hand. But the only thing that has come to light over the last day and a half, everyone waiting with bated breath to see the big reveal behind these claims is that they never had the evidence to back them up. And I'd like to walk briefly through what Ms. Lake needed to do to prevail on her claims and what she actually proved at this trial. As to count 2, on pages 6 to 7 of its order from earlier this week, the court ruled that plaintiff must show at trial that the BOD printer malfunctions were intentional and directed to affect the results of the election, and that such actions did actually affect the outcome.
Extremely high standard.
Plaintiff established none of this.
Yeah.
Plaintiff's star witness was Clay Parikh, a purported cybersecurity expert. Mr. Parikh drafted a report in preparation of this case in which he cited everything from Twitter posts to unsigned declarations to provide a host of...
All right. So you sort of get the gist of it. Her closing continues on, and she does walk through the evidence. They actually used less time, I think, because the plaintiffs, Kari Lake and her lawyers, have a rebuttal. And then, of course, it is over to the judge. So the judge has decided to take the case under advisement, and we don't have any new data on new entries for what is coming up next. We can see that closing arguments were done. Evidentiary hearing completed on these 2 dates. The judge has said that he'll take as much time as he needs to issue a ruling on this, but the matter is under advisement, so we'll get a written opinion from the judge. The judge will release that, and of course, we'll cover it here. I don't know when he's going to release it. He has to do it within 5 days, but within 5 days, of course, that's going to put us after Christmas. I would expect to see something tomorrow night, by the close of tomorrow night. I think he's going to really try to rush the opinion out. He's probably typing it away right now. But if we go back through and analyze all of the things that happened today, we've got closing arguments that was preceded by Ryan Macias, which was an election expert, saying all of this stuff is explainable, right? If there was a theme here from the defense, there's no intentionality, everything's explainable, all harmless error. Scott Jarrett said that, the actual harm is inconsequential. All of the ballots were counted. We have duplicate boards that actually review everything. This guy, Reynaldo Valenzuela, said Runbeck was not allowed to add anything to the final tallies, and that the chain of custody process was robust. They got a bunch of the documents admitted. We have Dr. Kenneth Mayer. He's another individual who testified today, and they left a huge part of the analysis out, right? If I have any critiques here for the plaintiff's case, Kari Lake's case, it's that they didn't dive in on that. That would have been a big focal point. The people who can't be counted, how many of them can we estimate were suppressed? Now, Richard Baris, of course, gave us some evidence about that, and he said that the numbers were massive. His models were great, right? And he gave us a lot of detail, but all of that detail still is difficult to get us to check these check boxes, right? The judge none of this stuff talks about models or exit polls or election political science or measuring, the results of interviews and surveys. It says specifically, we need a malfeasant person. We need printer malfunctions that were caused by an individual. When Kari Lake's lawyers were asking Scott Jarrett about the actual setting changes, they didn't dig in and dig out a name. I don't know why, but there was no malfeasant person identified. Didn't hear any actual names proffered. And that malfeasance, it was, I think, pretty well, you could identify it to potential lost votes, but the discrepancy there was so big. And it's going to be a tough road, I think, for Kari Lake to win. If I have any expectations, the judge is going to probably write a pretty heavy-handed opinion. I think he's probably going to scold Maricopa County and say, you guys ran a pretty poor election, but it was harmless error. But we have a great deference to the presumption of finality in our elections. And he's going to come up with a big justification as to why everything needs to just keep going and nothing changes. Now, the ask will be, will the Republicans do anything about this, whether their litigation teams step up, and actually prepare for this, fund some law teams to respond to these lawyers. There were, tons of lawyers from all over the country weighing in on this. We've covered several of them. One of them is from the Mark Elias Democracy Docket Law Group. They are the lawyers for the DNC. They filed notices of appearance. They all came crashing in here. And what we saw was, very interesting evidence. I think, anybody living in Arizona has doubts about it. I think Katie Hobbs's election is, going to be tarnished either way this goes. Still pulling for it, right? I have to live here. I hope the judge sees sort of the bigger picture that suppression happened on a massive scale, hours by their own admission, at different locations all around the valley, and they don't even quantify that at all. We'll see where it goes. Of course, we will continue to cover it, and we're going to jump into your questions and your comments right after we thank our sponsors of the show that we held off on since we were getting through all the headlines. But thank you to our friends over at 4Patriots. And my friends, before you get out of here, we're going to take your questions right after this short message from our sponsors, and right after I take a drink of water. That's going to be very loud. Let's turn that down. A food shortage could be coming. Even in the this is turning into a disaster. Let's turn off the volume booster. Here we go. United States experts have written about this. Get hydrated, my friends. We'll be back in drought, 1 minute. Inflation, even new policies are pushing America's food supply. Cheers, my friends. Its breaking point. That's why survival food is more important now than ever. And you can create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4Patriot survival food kits ever. This is not ordinary food. We're talking about good for 25 years super survival food. Hand-packed right in family-owned facilities in the United States, giving jobs to over 200 Americans. The kits are compact, they're sturdy, they're water-resistant, and they stack easily. They have different delicious breakfast, lunches, and dinners, and you can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. Oh, look how good that is. Just add boiling water, simmer, and serve. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com. Use code Robert to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store. Anything in the store at 4Patriots. And MindMeister has given us a difficult day today with some of our playback. You'll get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order, plus free shipping on orders over $97. They're called 4Patriots because a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and their families. Go to 4patriots.com. Use code Robert to get 10% off. That's 4patriots.com. Head on over there. Use code Robert. Start building your own stockpile today. I'm glad that I'm not wearing the same shirt. That'd be a little awkward. All right, so that, my friends, is our incredible sponsor over at 4Patriots. And we also have our law firm. If you know anybody in the state of Arizona that needs help with criminal charges, certainly send them our direction. We love helping good people charged with crimes find safety, clarity, and hope over at RR Law. az.com, 480-787-0394. All right, my friends, so let's take a look now at your questions, your super chats. I saw several of them come in. I'm very grateful for your support here with your contributions. We had, who started us off here today? Down on day 2 of the trial, I think it was Rinsler. Rinsler's here. Shout out to Rinsler. Rinsler says, every mail-in vote must count. Also, progressives, election day votes don't matter. Should have voted by mail. Yeah, I think that a lot of conservatives, a lot of Republicans are going to be playing that game the next go-round. Got caught on that one, right? All of the election day stuff, what did they just do? Well, they just made it hard to vote on election day. Isn't that convenient? Yeah, very convenient. Thank you, Rinsler, for that one. It's like one of those memes, you know. Which button do you press? Is it the button press meme? Mr. Schmickelpick is here, says your breakdown and summation, in my high-level opinion, it's the best. Well, thank you, Mr. Schmickelpick. That's very nice of you. You do have a very high-level opinion because your first name is Mr. It was just like proper already. Can't even deny it. Just Cause is here, says, wishing Rob and everyone in the chat a merry and blessed Christmas. That's very nice, Just Cause. Says, God be with you all. I'll be at work, but I love you guys and pray you enjoy your day. That is a very nice and cheery message, Just Cause. Thank you for, first of all, the dono, and for spreading the holiday cheer around. Can you see? We got Christmas lights on back here. Look at this. We got all festive. We decorated. It's because I got yelled at by Bonnie on Locals. Where are your lights at? All right, here they are. They look great. I like them. Thank you for the suggestion. All right, and so thank you to Just Cause. Hopefully you're having an amazing day and a lot of blessings in your area as well. Loveologist is in the house, no question, but thank you, Loveologist, for sending in the super chat. Very nice of you, Loveologist. It looks like you might have a YouTube channel. D. London is here, says the University of Wisconsin National Organization of Women. Oh, Yeah, now, UW Now, National Organization of Women. That's nice. Yeah, I was trying to see, like, if it was, like, you know, University of Women for the election of Katie Hobbs or something. You know, I didn't know what it was. That's pretty benign, pretty bland. You know, want to see if you can catch him with a biased mug. I was trying to catch him, but he's all clear. Dustin Woman is here, says, 2 hours? Yeah, 2 hours. I mean, you don't wait in line at Splash Mountain for 2 hours, do you? Which is now a racist ride, evidently. Don't know if you saw that one. Geomancy is in the house. You can subscribe to his YouTube channel right next door on YouTube at Geomancy. He says, Merry Christmas, you filthy animal. You know, I saw, actually, when Joey was here, my bro, Joey, when he was here, we watched the Home Alone 2 in New York, where they threw bricks at the dude's head. And I forgot how painful that was. When I was a kid, I was like, this is hilarious and funny. But now I'm like, dude, that dude got hit in the head with like 4 different bricks. He's going to have a concussion. He probably should see a doctor. But Merry Christmas to you, Gio. We also have Devin Knox says, I'd like to know who the tech that changed the setting was. Yeah, me too, Devin. I'd love to know that. Yes, I'd love to know that. I wish the defense attorney would have asked questions about that. Got names about that. And then said, Judge, this is new evidence. We'd love to get a subpoena for this person and, drag him in here. Can we get him on the phone now? Can we have an extra, 1 hour to question him? Didn't have this name before. Nothing came out. You don't even, and if he says, I don't know who the tech was, you don't know who the tech was who changed the settings? You just have random people changing your tech settings? I don't know. Strange. It felt like they sort of left out a bunch of stuff. Venus Valkyrie is here, says, sharing this one, says, bravo. A nice little, is that a Shibu? Giving us the nice clap. Thank you, Venus Valkyrie, with the Shibu clap. We've got Kari Lake, thumbs up. It looks like, I don't know if those emojis are coming in. Yeah, but those are, thank you for that one. And I can't even pronounce this one. It looks like a person in a car riding on waves. Shout out to the person in a car riding waves. Rinsler is here, says, if Kari Lake loses, we're all doomed. Lockdowns and mandates will be a thing. I hope DeSantis, the investigation on vaccines, negates that. Yeah, DeSantis is going hard on that stuff. And we'll see what he finds. Looking forward to it. We'll see what we can cover of that here. Yeah, I mean, people are talking about it in Arizona. Where does, like, Arizona's like evidently hard blue now. So where do we go? What do we do in Arizona? Because it's going to just continue to get worse. It's like California is bleeding into our state. It's disgusting. Gross. Stay over there. They're coming over here and they're infesting us. Rinsler says, if Kari Lake loses, we're all doomed. Thank you, Rinsler. Alan Harkin says, great presentation. I very much enjoy your intellect and wit. Well, that's good, says Alan. Sometimes, sometimes I wonder if there is much there. I'm glad that you enjoy it. I try to come up with some stuff every now and then. Sometimes it lands, sometimes it doesn't. But Alan, thank you for the very support and a very generous dono. And I'm glad that you're here and enjoying it with us. It is fun. I love hanging out with you guys. And I'm watching the chat as they're playing these clips. It's hysterical. So thanks for being here. All right, Eddie's is here. He says, Rob, with 2 full days of trial, I'm going to weigh in on this one, buddy boy. He says, first, your fault, as is always the case. If you're not familiar with Eddie, he chimes in when it's necessary to confirm my erroneous ways. Most of the time, it's not really appropriate to, chime in. Things are sort of on track, but he lets us know when things are off, like he's doing right now. He says, Rob, with 2 days of trial, I'm definitely weighing in on this one. First, your fault, but you already know that. Second, I invited all my friends in Texas over to watch the trial, and we just laughed and laughed at you and not with you. Well, at least you were viewing it. Thanks for being a viewer. Did you guys like the video at least? Can you just at least like it? You might not like me. You might be laughing at me, but at least like the video. It's good for the algorithm. And leave a comment too. And invite your friends to subscribe so they can come back and continue to make fun of me. That's okay. I make fun of myself most of the time anyways. But thank you, Eddie, for that one. I saw a couple others come in. And I think another one from Eddie I see flying by. Michael Krogan's here. We had some very generous ones coming in from CA Human, man. Very generous. 2 of those donos. Let's see what we've got today. We had this one from CA Human. Melanie Schwartz is also in the house. Says, well, let's go to Woods Precision Arms first. Woods Precision Arms says, Lake's lawyers tried to go too broad with very limited time. They should have focused on the voters who didn't vote because they waited for 2 hours or had to go somewhere else and hammered on that. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you, Woods Precision Arms, on this. Sounds like a great organization. Woods Precision Arms. Love that. Whatever you're doing with that sounds amazing. However, I think you're right on this comment. They didn't have much time. They had a big task ahead of them. They had some majorly high standards, but if I would have done this, I would have literally gone down the checklist that the judge shared with us on the under advisement opinion. Okay, the judge literally gave us the roadmap. And I'm not talking like this is over already, but it's probably a tall order. And I think that if they would have done that, like if they would have given one name, if they would have given one person and they would have said, we identified the change, like literally, this person changed this setting caused this amount of people to be delayed. It caused 2-hour delays at this location. The 2-hour delay would have impacted a net total of how many people voted? Let's say 10,000 people voted. If there would not have been delays, Kari Lake could have made the argument that, okay, if there weren't delays, it would have been 15,000 people who voted because a big portion of those votes would have come in first thing in the morning. And then that 5,000 discrepancy times those 3 different polling locations, let's say, that they said had major problems, that's the 15,000 votes. That gets you real close to the 17. So now you got to find another, 2,500, 3,000 votes somewhere else. Or you make it 16,000, right? Whatever it is. You just got to make the numbers fit. But you have to, it's got to be concrete. Like they need names and phone numbers. Like who is this person? Because that's what the judge wanted. And they didn't do that. And that's why it's going to be a problem for them. It sounds like a great story. It's really great. A lot of conversation, right? It's like that one person who'll tell you a great story, but it's like, can you actually do that thing? No, I can't. Okay, well, you have to hit those boxes. And you might disagree with the standards and say they're not fair at all, and it's ridiculous to ask Kari Lake to have the burden of proof on that. I'd agree with you. And I'd even say that the mere fact that there were delays that were 90 minutes to 2 hours at numerous polling places that they confirmed, in my opinion, that's enough. It should be actionable because you can't quantify this, right? You get one day. It's like if you go to the Super Bowl and one team can't start until the second quarter. What? The first team's just running the ball all day. And the second, the other team can't play. It's not a fair game. Melanie Schwartz says, I think the judge only allowed the claims that would be hard to prove. They were very high standards, yeah. I'm sure he didn't want to be in a position to have to rule in Kari's favor. It could be a death wish. Agree. Yeah, and look, I don't want to impugn this judge, and I don't want to say that this judge would buckle to pressure or anything like that, because of course that's not the case. Shout out to Judge Thompson. However, right, yeah, there is a lot of public pressure on this case. And can you imagine, what his future looks like if he's the guy who had us all redo Arizona elections? That's a lot of pressure for anybody, man. And so I agree with you, Melanie. I think it's a tall ask. We had another one from C.A. Human with 2 very generous donos. It says, Merry Christmas, Robert. Palm tree, peace sign. Thank you for all you do for us. Well, C.A. Human, that's just so nice. It just makes me almost emotional. I mean it. Like it makes, I have a ton of fun with you. I feel like you guys do a ton for me. So when you say it that way, it's like, well, I love being here with you. And so Merry Christmas to you, C.A. Human. It's great that you're here with us. I see you all the time. This also says, please give this to our faithful lawn guy. Tell him Merry Christmas from the chat. Yeah, you're talking about leaf blower guy, lawn guy. We've got street cleaner guy. We've got our constructor bros out there. We've got the popo driving around, our fire bros. We got them all out there on the streets. And yeah, they all deserve Merry Christmases too, especially lawn guy and leaf blower guy. They follow us around all over the place. You're like, oh, perfect. Rob's doing a walk and talk today. Fire up the leaf blowers. Get on those lawnmowers. Pull out the weed eaters. It's time. Thank you, C.A. Human, for both of those. I'm grateful that you're here. I appreciate your support. And I hope you have a wonderful Christmas and your family and everyone else you know and everybody else you think about too. We have another one from Curtis, says, if Lake loses, can SCOTUS hear the case? Yeah, I mean, if they wanted to step in, they could. They would. They won't, because it's a state issue. You know, this could, yes, Kari Lake could appeal. She could. This is happening in Maricopa County Superior Court. And so the Maricopa County Superior Court, the next level would be a court of appeals, and then the Arizona Supreme Court. And as a sort of a general rule, you know, the Supreme Court generally doesn't like to weigh in on like interstate issues. Like they'd rather just let the state Supreme Court deal with the state issue. So the U.S. Supreme Court, not going to hear it. The Arizona Supreme Court, maybe. But there would need to be some evidentiary failing, like the judge would have had to have precluded something, not allowed something in, or allowed something in, or done something wrong, not just that the judge came to a different conclusion. It's got to be something actionable. Eddie Oliver says, Rob, still here in Texas, and we are all still laughing. I even laughed bourbon and beer out of my nose. Did I tell you that Greg Abbott is our governor? Yeah, we knew that like 3 hours after the polls closed. Come to Texas, Rob. 3 exclamation points. Yeah, I know. It's like a joke. Yeah, Eddie's like, you know, you idiots voted in November 8th, you know, by the way. It's Christmas time, Rob. It's Christmas. So what the hell's going on over there? I don't know, Eddie. We're working on it, man. We're working through it. But yeah, we deserve to be laughed at. We'll take it. We'll take it. Hopefully we figure it out here very soon. But all right, let's do a final refresh over here. I saw some other super chats. Very generous today, everybody. Thank you so much for sending all of this in. Eddie said a couple of these. Michael Krogan is in the house. He says, Psy Ninjas cited image issues in their report, which was a prior report about the prior election. Yeah, and Michael, you know, the judge specifically precluded all of that. Like the part of Kari Lake and her chain of custody arguments, if you remember, they actually brought that up. Let's see if we can drag that up here real quick, because I have it right here. Right. This is in addition to Kari Lake's complaints about the handling of 2020. The elections, the allegations concerning 2020 have no bearing on this contest. The court does not consider them. And even after Kari Lake and her attorneys tried to bring this up sort of multiple times, the judge said, sorry, we're just not indulging it. Don't even get into the 2020 stuff. So it's interesting, but the judge isn't even considering it. He's just looking at it. This election only. Jay Waters says, this is not the end if she loses. As long as the judge doesn't dismiss the case with prejudice, Ms. Lake can appeal to a higher court. Yeah, she can definitely appeal. I just don't have a lot of faith in the appeal, because the appeal, again, it's got to be on a technical error. Like, she doesn't get to introduce new evidence. So if there was an appeal, you know, like if the judge improperly dismissed an account, or the judge's ruling was, yeah, I think appeals are long shot, but she certainly can appeal. And, you know, to be honest, I don't think that they'll go anywhere. Just sort of knowing our appellate system. We'll see. Although I don't do a lot of appeal work, so take that with a grain of salt. Dustin Woman is here, says, rage quit, banging on, I think this is a phone rage quitting on the ground, or a computer rage quitting. Yeah, I know a lot of people feel like that. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, you know. I mean, I hate going through this stuff and being like, yeah, bummer. But at the same time, it's sort of reality, and I don't want to be somebody who's, you know, not telling you honestly what I think is real. We got to keep it real here. It's that big spotlight of transparency, baby. Venus says, appreciate you so much, Rob. Venus, that's so sweet of you. Thank you. Says, Merry Christmas, everybody. And we've got Santa Claus, we've got Miss Claus, we've got younger Claus, who's Claus Jr. is in the house, and 2 Christmas trees from Venus Valkyrie. Thank you, Venus. I appreciate you back, and Merry Christmas to you as well. Glad that you're here with us. Doug Murray says, Rob, could Lake's team have brought in voters and had them testify firsthand about what happened to them individually? Hobbs' team would have looked so nasty trying to discredit the voters testifying under oath. Yeah, I mean, they could have done that. The problem would have been, like, what element does that hit, right? Like, what element does a single voter hit? They would say, I didn't, well, and honestly, they'd have to find a voter that was, I guess, suppressed, right? So I think that might have been like a missing witness to share one story. Although, they submitted a bunch of stuff. So to be fair, I haven't read every affidavit. I haven't read every declaration. Part of what the judge did is he said, submit all your stuff, right? If you recall back during the trial, the Kari Lake's lawyers were making the argument that the election day worker witnessed all sorts of chaos. And they started to go into that line of questioning. And the judge said, well, what do you want? Do you want to ask him about the chaos, or do you want me to read the text messages about the chaos? Which one? And he said, well, there's a lot more text messages than testimony. So why don't you just accept the text messages? So, right, there could be a bunch of other, and there were also affidavits and declarations that were under seal. So I don't know if those came from voters. I think they did. I think they kept them under seal because they didn't want their identities. So I think there is evidence of that, but I don't know that we heard of it because it is under seal. In fact, I think that is even written on the file list. Yeah, they wrote here, right? Actually here, in a minute entry back on December 14th, the Superior Court ordered the verified parts of the election contest filing parts 8, 9, and 10 sealed. And I think those were affidavits of voters, right? And they sealed them to keep their identities safe. So the judge has them, but we didn't get to see it. Now, the question, as usual, is going to be whether that is consequential, whether it checks those boxes. And I don't think that it's going to be enough. Now, what they were trying to do is fill in the gap with Richard Baris. So Baris then would take that affidavit and he would say, extrapolate that. Okay, that affidavit times all of Arizona. That shows me the gap, right? And so it's circumstantial, but they're asking the judge to fill in the gaps. But whether the judge will do that, and sort of overcome the finality of the election, sort of, reverse that presumption is, I think, a tall order. Eddie Oliver's in the house. Says, I don't know if I ever told you this, Rob, but I left Arizona because of the influx of people from California. I know, they're everywhere, dude. They tried to do the same thing here in Texas, so we passed the heartbeat bill, so we get the right kind of Californians. Smiley face. Well, that's a good strategy. It's a really good strategy. Arizona, we should have done something like that, but we missed our boat, unfortunately, which is why, might have to pick up and move shop to the great state of Texas. It's either Texas or Florida or Wyoming. Where the hell else are we going now that Liz Cheney's out of there? So thank you to Eddie Oliver for another one. Really appreciate you as well, my friend. Very generous with the donos tonight, everybody. Thank you very much for sending those in. And I think that's it. And we caught up on those. And so I see the rest of the chat. Okay, I just got my chat just caught up. And so shout outs. I see Cool Guys in the house. We've got Curtis Bartles over there. Lean is modding down the fort for us. Lisa Marie says, we've got tons in Texas too. You got Californians in Texas? Oh man, the worst. Crappy closing from our guy, says Vaholand. Yeah, it wasn't good. That's why I didn't play the whole thing, right? It got off keister there pretty bad. What's up, Lean? Lean says, hey, Rob. Our friends over on Rumble, Detum says, Rob, can't Arizonans file thousands of lawsuits, flood the system like a DDoS? Can't we just file thousands? We could. I mean, you could. You could always flood the system. They'd all get dismissed. They'd say, you don't have standing. You don't have any real basis for filing a complaint. If you don't like it, go vote differently, right? Complain to your elected officials. A lot of these things are sort of considered generalized grievances, and they just don't allow you to file them. We've got Larry, says, shout out to Tennessee. WTF's the limit, says, sup, Rob. Jacob Castro's in the house. He says, wee! El Paso, hometown of Francis Beta and Soros, is giving money to the illegals, says Little Galaxy. And so shout out to our Rumble friends over there. We got some activity in the chat. I appreciate everybody watching over there. And we've got, amazing. All right. But that, my friends, is it for us for the day. Second Amendment sent in a super chat. Thank you very much, Second Amendment. It's a beautiful title you have there. A beautiful amendment. One of the best, in fact. That's why it's number 2. It's a really good one. We have another one from Cool Guy. Says, Rob, great analysis. Time to pray for the best outcome from Cool Guy. I agree with that. Cool Guy says, amen, Karen. Pete Griswold says, research somebody. Allison Cole says, we are so powerful. Just imagine the outcome you want. It works. We are so powerful. Just imagine the outcome you want. It works. Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. What the mind can conceive and the eyes can see, the world can achieve. There's a phrase, I just botched it. I don't know what it is. What you can believe and the mind can conceive, you can achieve. It's something like that. The guy who said something like that is named Dan Sullivan. Very smart guy, strategic coach. All right, but that, my friends, is it for us on the day. We covered a lot of ground. Day 2 from Kari Lake. And of course, as soon as that opinion comes out, we will dive into it. I want to thank everybody who is a part of the show. We are going to go over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com for a short after party so we can wrap it up for the day. But before we get out of here, one final shout out and thank yous to our sponsors of the program. Don't forget to head over to forpatriots.com. Use promo code Robert to get 10% off of anything in the store and get your food so that you have calories when you need them. Also, our law firm, rrlawaz.com. I know most of you are not from Arizona, probably don't even come to Arizona, but if you know anybody in the state of Arizona, we love helping good people charged with crimes. We demand the government preserves the presumption of innocence. We hold the prosecutors to the beyond a reasonable doubt standard. We don't let anybody from the government push our clients around. We love to help good people find that safety, that clarity, and that hope after they've been charged with a crime. Thank you for sending them our direction. 480-787-0394. And of course, thank you to the mods who mod down the fort for us. Big shout outs to Vientikis. We've got K-Bean, Just Cause. I saw Lean is in the house. Playing Hooky, Ronnie Cole, Zulu, Geomancy stopped by. And we're grateful for all the mods who mod down the fort for us. But that, my friends, is it for the program on the day. We are going to go over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com. So my friends over there, hang tight for about 30 seconds. The rest of you, my friends, I hope you have a beautiful night and you sleep very well and you're wrapping up all your finished presents and you're ready to go. And you come back tomorrow, same time, same place, so that we can do it all again. So that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. Have a tremendous evening, my friends. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.